Thanks for everyone attending. And so on the back of kind of what we've done over the kind of last sort of 4 webinars, a bit of a discussion that obviously Use and Hank that we've talked about over a period of time is just, I guess, understanding literally what is in front of the screen there is kind of how good is good. And I'm going to sort of talk through a journey of kind of understanding kind of where I got to, which is there's a lot of data out there that you've got access to through, you know, PGA Tour and different tours and books that are now sort of talking about it. But more importantly, how can we actually practically use kind of maybe some of that information and kind of what does it look like on a day-to-day from a practice point of view. So kind of the theme for me tonight is going to be a little bit more sort of, I guess, more practical in regards to, well, it can't be practical because I'm not there to be able to show you, but more practical in regards kind of how do I use that information in a training session? How do I use sort of, I guess, not just that information, but I'll get into a little bit of kind of how do we use, you know, the other service providers' information, they either being, you know, physio screenings or psych screenings and stuff like that, and how can we actually help the kind of the person that's in front of us or the athletes in front of us. So moving right along, and I think hopefully for most of the people in the room, they've kind of seen this as a potentially seen it in a previous webinar and a slide, and I know that I've given this to UC and he's used it over time with some of the athletes in Finland. It's actually a very interesting kind of where we got to here was, so a close friend of mine and Use is a Dr. Matt Bridge, and we were sitting at a coaching summit in Queensland, Australia, sort of just kind of going back and forth on kind of where we see kind of trying to help develop athletes and coaches at the same time. And one thing that we sort of really worked on is where we started to have a conversation is we actually didn't really understand ourselves how good is good, and then how do we actually teach players to actually play the game and understanding what is good. You know, there's as you know that we've all been out there and probably yourself as golfers as well. That, you know, you hit whatever it is, an 8-iron to 20 feet, and you feel like it should have been closer. The reality is it's actually, you know, within tour standard or better than tour standard. So giving players an understanding that and understanding kind of what's acceptable and what's not, how to map themselves around a golf course and how they effectively you know, set up their course management strategies around kind of effectively playing this game. So one thing that we kind of talked about, and as you've seen, you can have a play around with it. We can talk a little bit more into if anyone has questions at the end, into a little more detail of kind of how it's used. I would generally, if I've got a training squad, I would generally break it into 2 parts. I would kind of educate them on the putting stuff originally, so they might be out on the golf course just doing the putting game, understanding kind of what percentage of putts they should be holed, and the point system that's around it. And then I've got putting skills test that kind of relates back to the same similar sort of scoring. Vice versa, then the full swing stuff about understanding kind of the cause and effect of where you hit it. More importantly, we talk about kind of in and out of position, and I've used that a lot, especially training on the range. Sort of, I think for most of us know what kind of in and out of position is. That sort of if you're hitting into a green and the pin's tucked hard left and you miss it left, it's obviously out of position, versus if you miss it on the right, it's in position. So a point system that kind of rewards you to be able to not just miss it in the right spot, but also hit it in the right spot. And then vice versa, sort of you do get rewarded if you're able to get up and down from a short side position. But as we know, throughout the course of a round, more important, the course of a tournament, it's quite hard to sustain it over time. So it's a very cool game. I know it's in, and in use, I haven't I'm not too sure of meters, yards, but I know I can do the conversion on that. Potentially you've already got it anyway. So the things I've done tonight, I've tried to kind of look at kind of meters, yards and feet, because we all sort of talk about, and players talk about things differently. It's quite weird down here that, you know, we're in the metric system, we work in meters, but we listen to the Golf Channel in the US, and obviously they talk about yards and feet. So we generally talk about meters going into the greens, but then we talk about feet when we're on the greens, which I knew that was when I was working with programs in Belgium and around the world, they found that very confusing, because why would you say one thing and go down a different path another thing? But another topic. I guess this is it's a pretty cool slide here. This is a guy that for the people that kind of follow the European Tour, that's Lucas Herbert, who's, you know, a young Australian guy that was in my program for a good number of years. And we kind of, I don't coach him. I'm not his home coach, but we still check in. We're still, you know, we're mates and we check in. And obviously the kind of topic around this was kind of how do we use the data? And when I was talking about high performance camps, which is similar sort of camps that Pro Use is involved in, and the other guys and girls are involved in. And obviously there's a lot of information out there, but how do we actually use that information for the player that's in front of us, or not more importantly, but for the coaches or the providers that work with them? So, and I know that we've talked about this for a bit, use that, you know, I think making the player as the kind of the key point. That's the reason why we're all there anyway, is really sort of getting them to ask the questions on what they feel they need to do better, and then allow the providers to kind of work around that. Now, obviously that might change. You know, you get a young developing kid that could be 12, 13, 14, and that information obviously is going to look different, sound different, and we might need to guide them a little bit differently in regards to kind of the information that we do, to try and understand kind of what it looks like in the future. This is actually quite an interesting one, that he has a very structured kind of routine he does before, like actually starts on the putting green before he does anything else. And he's got a routine of what he's got set up there on left to right putts, right to left putts, straight putts. And him and his coach were very kind of quite curious about kind of understanding what the movement patterns were, or effectively what the drills that they set up were, they're actually doing what they were supposed to be doing. So we spent quite a few hours just kind of going through kind of what his pre-shot routine or pre-round routine was on the putting green, and really kind of cleared up kind of an understanding of kind of what was useful, and maybe there's some stuff there that we can kind of leave out. So here's me trying to be a little bit fancy. Hopefully you guys get that. Can you see that?
Yep, loud and clear, Marty.
Cool. So one thing that we get from, obviously, with, you know, developing kind of high performance players, is that there's a kind of a list of people that are, and those titles might be the same, but the people might change over time for different reasons. But really understanding that, you know, for an athlete to kind of go through the systems, you know, there's obviously quite a lot of people that are involved in it. And what I always say, and I mean this in the nicest way, that everyone feels their job's really important. I always have this conversation a lot, you know, what we do and what we think we, you know, is obviously for the right reason, we think is very important. And making sure that egos are kind of not attached to that, because the most important thing is trying to help the kind of person that's in front of you, which is the player that we're all trying to get better. So really, I think the head coach or the home coach, depending on the situation, is probably the most important player in the system. And then understanding relative to the age and development of that player, you know, the information that's provided in those kind of those training camps or those training scenarios, how do you actually then implement that stuff over a period of time? And I think, as we know, they're all at different stages. So, you know, I'm kind of big on that. You know, everyone's program needs to and should look different. And I think hopefully my next slide, well, obviously I'm going to skip right through here. Obviously everyone's seen that, you know, obviously been around sort of bullying. We've all got, you know, in a great way, we've got the systems and information that we've got there in front of us, which is great. You know, I think one thing that I've definitely learned about kind of working with bully and guys like you around the world is, I think we all kind of agreed at some point that, you know, is there something we can do well today to kind of help you play better today, but they're not understanding what is, things that we can do maybe over the course of this year, the next year, and into the future to potentially avoid doing, or more importantly, actively getting better at. And then how does that network of the team around them, how's that network then interlink into kind of what that looks like on a weekly, a monthly, and yearly sort of plan of kind of, what's important at certain stages. And I think that's kind of the kind of really crucial thing is that one thing that we don't potentially do, but I know, as a high performance coach, you're obviously looking at schedules the whole time, but really understanding kind of the person that's in front of you relative to the world rankings. It could be professional or amateur. If they've got obviously a job on the tour, what status they've got to be able to play into what they have. Really understanding the information that we get from this type of environment, how does that then actually fit into kind of what their schedule looks over that sort of 12-month period. And then, between obviously the coach, head coach, home coach, and the athlete, how does that then kind of look like from a week to week to a month to month and so on. So this was an athlete that I work with. This is before pre-COVID. So he was kind of, I think I've already spoke to him, he's kind of world number 2 amateur in the world at the time, very busy schedule in regards to kind of bouncing around between the US, Europe. He was playing through Asia, and then professional events versus amateur events, and then making sure that we're actively still trying to make sure there's enough training sort of blocks in there that we can actually still implement the stuff that we need to do to the ongoing improvement. I guess this is kind of a bit of the theme of the night, is kind of how good is good. And as we've seen in previous webinars, I'm also very big at kind of measuring and understanding kind of, I guess what is good. And I think a lot of time we look at the ranges that we work at, and I say this all the time, the range that I work at that frustrates me because it doesn't look like a golf course at all. I've got a big wide open paddock with poles on it at different yardages. That doesn't look like anything close to how we play golf. So trying to come up with kind of different kind of testing or skills tests that kind of gets it really more into that kind of game mode. Obviously the best skills tests are on the golf course, but sometimes we don't have an opportunity, and more so for maybe you guys over there, through the winter periods where the best is indoors and in domes and whatnot. So how can you actually then, replicate to some or a closer degree of kind of measuring and testing just to see how they're moving. And I know my experience working with some programs, say in Belgium, where they talk about on season and off seasons, and it was nearly, to me, and I'll be curious to hear the coaches' sort of thoughts about this, maybe towards the end of the session, that this mindset that there's an on season and off season and whatnot, where the reality is professional golf, there's no really on season, off season. As you know, that the schedules now literally just roll out. They actually now start before the end of the next year. So depending on your ranking, depending on where you sit, there's no really off season, on season. So I think it's important as us, we're trying to, obviously there's times that, we need to rest and move away, get away from golf for a little bit, but understand we're trying to develop athletes to be quite versatile and adaptable to potentially playing many, many weeks in a row. And I know a lot of the schedule stuff, a lot of as obviously younger people that, playing 2 weeks in a row might be a big thing. So really trying to get them to understand kind of, what does it look like to be a tour professional? What is the level that you need to play at to be a tour professional? And then how do you then train that in your own environment, sort of back at home? So, and obviously you guys will get the slide over here. I kind of just work through some of the benchmarks, which is some of the skills tests that I use. Sort of looking at, obviously me, working in meters, I've converted to yards, and then in all the different sort of distance categories. I've got number 1 on tour, how far they hit it from that's a whole season. So how far they average from the hole, 2.8 meters, 3 yards or 9 feet, depending on kind of how you look at it. And a game that I've looked at is that what I'll do is I'll do a 10 ball challenge to a target on the range, and generally most of the time it's going head to head with another player at a very sort of skill limit, and we say it's the 68 to 91. The benchmark is 4.4 meters, and obviously on TrackMan or hitting to a range or hitting into a net, we're not looking at kind of where the ball finishes because we don't have that opportunity to understand the rub of the green and whatnot. So I look at kind of distance from the pin, so that's calculating the carry distance and the side. So my benchmark is to say at 68 to 91 that 4.4 meter average over 10 shot is world class. So just kind of testing these guys in these environments, and they're quite interesting because they start to really understand while doing those tests, okay, what is the level that we need to kind of test at? And then if there's weaknesses in those levels, okay, is it a technical issue? Is it a training issue that either there's not spending the amount of time in those areas? So it really opens up a lot of conversations and a lot of thought around kind of, okay, well, what is the reason why they're not being able to kind of, get close to the benchmark? Is there a pattern to their miss? One, the thing I brought up in one of the other webinars that Eduardo Molinari and I kind of worked through some stuff years ago, which is on the right-hand side there, that he looked at into if anyone's spending time with him or listen to him talk into more detail than I've heard any player talk about, but he's got a spreadsheet that we use that we look at. Another, again, it's like a 10 ball test where we actually look at the pin location being the left or the right. So there's a in position versus out of position. And then we look at what are their misses? Is there more of a miss onto a left pin relative to this? And then we actually go into more detail where we could add then ball shapes. So we look at draw versus fade, and then we're looking at draw versus fade relative to TrackMan on a kind of spin axis value where anything under 2.5 degrees either way is regarded as kind of straight. 2.5 to 5 is a draw or a fade, positive or negative. So we're actually looking at trying to control flight, not just trying to big draw, big fade. So how well they can actually then control those flights. And then there's another test that we look at where we're looking at draw shape, left to right, and then also trajectory, sort of mid, high, low. So there's windows that they have to be able to hit, and there's a point system that goes relative to that. Really starting to understand then potentially you as coaches already know the shots that they're struggling with, but for them to put them in a situation where they're going to struggle in training, and then let them ask the questions, okay, well, why do I keep missing it that way? Which then they can go back to kind of, the anatomy stuff. It can go back to kind of the 3D that was displayed in whatever, but allows them in training to hopefully allow, them to ask you better questions about kind of how can we can improve. And this was, I threw that in because I think it's really cool. This was Eduardo flew down. This was quite a few years ago. He called me up on the back of a conversation that we spent some time in. Actually, it was with Bully Ryegate, and we were talking about some of the players I was working with, and we're talking about actually on-course game that I was developing and different ways of training. And so I gave him a heap of my stuff. He gave me a stack of his stuff, and we went back and forth for a little bit. And then he called me out of nowhere, says, look, I'd like to come down and spend a couple of weeks with you just to kind of see what you do and train. And by the time he came down, he already came up with the skills test that I just talked about there. And then we worked through kind of the players and the squad, and they went kind of head to head with him as well. So very, very cool that, and the guys, which was great. The guys could see, obviously a Ryder Cup player coming down to kind of hang out with this guy or with these guys and then also sort of test in that environment. I think that's one thing that's kind of really, really important when you're trying to kind of get some buy-in with players is that, getting I guess, Sammy is probably the best example for, rookie of the year last year for Finland Golf. If he came in, he brought in a training session into kind of some type of benchmarking or some type of kind of testing that you guys are doing that, everyone under him would, obviously they're all looking up to someone like him at the moment, would jump straight on board. So I think it's important understanding that, as good as the information's there, I know I had to play, I had to really work hard with different athletes to make sure that, the influential guys and girls that making sure they understood kind of the reason why we do what we had to do for the outcomes that we're trying to achieve. I threw this in when I was talking to the guys last night. So we're in, well, actually, as of 12 o'clock tonight, we're out of lockdown. We had a 5-day lockdown on because we had 10 cases or something in Victoria. But I was able to continue to train professional athletes, and it's one thing I did just yesterday, just showing that kind of it's literally every single. These guys they're not too sure where their schedules are sitting at the moment in regards to tournaments and what they can and can't play, but they're screaming to be competitive. So I think it's our job to come up with strategies to allow them train, because in a competitive way, so they're somewhat closer to be ready when they go play. They don't have we don't have that privilege now where they've got a schedule where they can kind of warm up to events. So they can play 2 or 3 and they feel better in their 3rd and 4th or 5th weeks. Our guys and girls, like no doubt, same for you guys, they need to be, if something comes up and all the stars line up where they're able to fly in, fly out and do everything else, they need to be ready to play with potentially with no tournament practice or no tournament competition going on beforehand. So I think it's really crucial that we come up with these kind of strategies or ideas around kind of how we're going to do that. Here's a couple. This is a couple of things that I came up with a little while ago, which was trying to understand for a tournament player. I looked at in a 72-hole tournament, kind of using in this case with shots to hole, so using the stats program I was using from different areas of the game, how often they hit certain shots over a 72-hole tournament. And then the same for putting as well. So I sort of broke down the putting into kind of 3 to 15 feet. And then I looked at kind of from a training week point of view, when you look at kind of the athletes that we work, all the players that we work with, are they actually hitting enough shots within those areas that they need or require in a 72-hole tournament? So, there's many times where, you as a coach prescribe that, whatever it is, they've got to work on their technique doing this, but are they testing their skills weekly at what is required at tournament level? So that's, so there's an idea now, obviously it's similar to what I did with the kind of on-course game. There's a point system that goes with it and then gives them an understanding kind of what is world-class in regards to those areas. And I think that's crucial and something that we talked about with the guys, and there's our little project for the coaches between now and the next webinar, is that using the information that's available either through the presentation tonight and or online, what we'd like everyone to do is come up with a skills test. We're going to look at different areas of the game, called short game, called iron playing, called tee shots, or what it may be. Come up with a skills test that replicates as well as you can. So being random, using the information or data that we have of what is world class, and with some type of point system that goes with it. And then you guys are going to have to then send that back in, and ideally that you've actually used it on the players that you work with or yourself. You've just gone through it yourself. But just for you guys to understand that and kind of go through the process of understanding, the information's out there, then how can I then implement that into the environment that's in front of me? So it could be indoor right now using TrackMan. How can I use TrackMan in a better way, understand the information that I got? So something we can talk about a little into more detail kind of at the end of the webinar, and no doubt there'll be hopefully some questions around it, and go from there. Another area that I think it's quite important, and I know obviously different programs use different type of platforms in regards to keeping stats. This is a way that while I used to use shots to hole, I actually use Spider Golf now with some of the players I work with. But this was a way that we used to report, used to do it every sort of quarterly, and try to get to understand different areas of the game of how they're benchmarking. Sort of obviously the obvious that's there in front of you, 0 to 3 feet, 3 to 5, or the the dispersion stuff, and then they benchmark that against score. So then it was my job then to go into understanding kind of what they were doing in practice or in training, and then implement either technical stuff that we found that was kind of allowing them or not allowing them to kind of meet the benchmarks, or was it a training or practice point of view of kind of how they're kind of going about their practice, or in a lot of times as well as just the players just unaware. They thought they were actually quite good at that area and were found out to be, no, that's where it's actually costing them a lot of shots. Vice versa, they could have been quite, they thought they were quite poor in an area, which I think that's a lot of the time we find in stats. I think that they're not doing as good relative to them when they actually see the results. They're like, actually, that is pretty close to world class. So making sure you're spending the right time on the areas that are really going to influence score over, say, a 12-month period. And obviously, this is then just going into some of the longer stuff. So no different to what we looked at before. Looking at dispersion patterns, from 0 to 250 meters, which is similar to then what we had, what I showed you earlier about kind of those different ranges as relative number 1 in the world, number sort of 10 in the world. So using that information once again into longer stuff, how do we implement change or improvement, or reinforce that what they are doing is world class, and making sure they stay on top of it. I came up with actually this. This is kind of how I feel like how I do work, and I came up with this the other day, and I thought it was interesting that I think every sort of training session should kind of move this way, where we assess, and it's quite interesting when we talk about kind of service providers going into camps or going into having organised appointments. I know even the physio that I work with back here, he is effectively screening that athlete every time he walks into his clinic. I think us as golf pros are effectively screening, technically screening that player that's in front of us every time they come in. So I think, the assessment stuff is just one of those things that is just an absolute ongoing, and we actually do that, every time they walk through the door. Knowing the history behind it, I think it's important, making sure that we've got the information that we've had from, the physios or the psychs or whatever it is, how that looks, and how we can then sort of assess around that or implement stuff around that. And then from there, the kind of the training part, or the training environment, I think is the most crucial part, is then how do you guys as coaches, girls as coaches, put systems and structures in place that allows them to be exposed in a good way or a bad way, to be exposed to kind of you know, what they're doing, and then how you go then around measuring those, you know, that type of exposure. And then more importantly, the kind of the debrief behind it, which is, I think, something that we don't do enough of. Well, I know personally, I found it quite hard or quite challenging with golfers to that kind of debrief after a tournament. You might have the stats there, you might have, you know, where they finished, whatever it may be. But a lot of the time, I don't know if it's an Australian thing, but a lot of the time the guys and girls aren't that interested in debriefing. So kind of knowing when to debrief and making sure you got the information, you know, compared to, we're no different to, say, football over there with you guys, or other codes, that I think the debrief part in other sports is done a lot better than what we do in golf. And I said I'm only seeing what I've known from sort of the institute that I was at, the, you know, the netball program or the football program, whatever it may be. You know, that it was quite different because they would have a team of sports scientists that are capturing information, data, video, whatever it may be, and they would spend the day after an event going through and debriefing and then assessing, and then working out, okay, what do they need to do for the following week to get better. So I think it's, you know, that kind of circle of, if we can get our players to understand that, just even in a non-tournament week where you train that way, that, okay, it's assessment, I walk in through the door this way today, how does my training session look that way in regards to kind of what has been exposed or what has been sort of flagged up through the team? How do I then measure it? And then how do I then, from there, how do I debrief that, not just back to obviously yourself, but back to the people that work with you? And really starting to implement that in that training environment, which then becomes, I think, a lot easier than when they get into that kind of tournament world where they're, whereas us as coaches are trying to get more information out of them, they're just used to behaving that way, that there's a process to how they assess and reassess stuff. And I think that's, yeah, if I was to get anything more out of kind of the guys I work with, and some of the guys I work with are quite good at it, and some of the guys are quite good at a period of times. They're generally, as we generally know, that, you know, when you're playing well, it's quite easy to kind of go through that process because it's quite easy to talk about the things you do well, which I think we all know when the players that we work with are playing well, we pretty much know what they do when they do it well. It's actually, I think it's more important is those kind of the bad days, you want to call it, where all the days they struggle, all the days they miss the cut, is, okay, what can we really learn about kind of how we, you know, what's going on, and, you know, going even drilling further into, you know, the you know, nutrition, the sleep patterns. I know there's a lot of information out at the moment around all that type of stuff, and you know, really getting more into kind of getting them to understand sort of what they're doing, obviously in and on the golf course, but away from the golf course, and how that influences their performance. And this is where I want to get into hopefully a lot more conversation with everyone that we've got in regards to kind of what I'm talking about. More importantly, some ideas about potentially coming up with different ways of kind of testing and skills testing the players that you actually do work with, and then see what we can, you know, as a collective group. As I said, I'm happy to share, which I'm sharing kind of stuff that I've done over a good chunk of time, and there's stuff that that you can use. But I'm really keen to see kind of where you guys. I know I'm still working. I've still got some stuff that I'm working on. I'm sort of trying to always work on stuff because the players in that in itself get kind of sick of doing the same everyone might be the best test in the world, but get tired of doing the same stuff every day. So having a menu of call it skills testing or measuring or whatever it may be over here that we can use to keep them interested in kind of the way they train, the way they play, but also allows us to really benchmark them against kind of what is world class. I think it's crucial. So I'm really keen to kind of get everyone's thoughts on, and obviously there's a lot of great coaches in the room that have probably come up with a lot of great things as well. So we're keen to kind of get everyone's thoughts on how they can, or what they're currently doing, or different ideas of kind of what they think they can do things better going forward.
I guess it's not really a kind of directly related to that question, Marty, but I just wanted to kind of just pick your brain a little bit. I mean, I've been lucky. I've watched you kind of work up close with players, and the one thing that always stood out to me was, I guess, the intensity of what you guys were doing. How deliberate everything was without being rigid. So I mean, maybe just kind of open up on that a little bit and just kind of talk about that. I mean, when we met at Turnberry, for example, quite a few years ago now, but I mean, it was some of the things that you guys were doing were kind of trying to be more creative, but at the same time, I mean, you were still pretty much measuring everything the guys were doing. And to me at the time, it kind of just seemed relentless, but ultimately it was serving a purpose. So, I mean, maybe, do you want to maybe open up a little bit about that that's related to this, directly to this topic? I mean,
well,
that's kind of your experience on that.
Yeah, if you look at kind of, I guess, the how good is good, I guess it starts back to, stuff that I've talked about with, obviously in my program, but different programs that I'm still involved with, is actually understanding what does world-class look like from even just a training environment point of view. So I know I've done a kind of I used to do 360 reviews on a training session where the athletes, the coaches, providers, whatever it is, there might be a task of going through that testing, and what is the level that you guys are completely involved in that task. And then what we do, call it 1 out of 5, sort of, one being just no good, 5 being excellent, and they had to rate themselves and obviously rate us as the coaches as well, kind of how involved we were in that environment at that testing point of view. So educating them to understand that, there's a time that you really need to switch on and really get involved. No different to, when you grab the scorecard and you get on the first tee, you need to switch on and get involved. So once again, it goes down to, you need to implement that in that and training environment. But then, as you said, also, you also need to be flexible in regards to kind of how that can look from player to player. So, it's not saying that, you can all have a lot of fun in what we do, because that's why we do it. But making sure when it is time to kind of tune in and switch on, they're very, very clear what the task is. They understand what world class is and the reason why they're there. And I was obviously, it was quite, and when we met years ago, it feels like a long time ago, these players were getting funded to travel the other side of the world, to, the opportunity to play some of the best courses against some great competition. And, I had a very, very high expectation on, I think they were very privileged to be able to do that. And they had to represent the country, they had to represent themselves, their family, and the people that were working with them. So there was I'm not trying to put any more pressure on them, but at the end of the day, that's kind of what we do. We're trying to, even for ourselves, we're doing the same stuff. So I guess it's just, once again, it goes back to kind of that, your kind of purpose of why you're there and what we're all trying to achieve. And you get the right people and the right sort of, definitely when you get the right people around you and the athletes around you, things can really progress very, very quickly. and was very noticeable for many years when the players these amateurs or professionals are winning professional tournaments, and the people under, or the kids underneath, or the parents underneath, or the providers, coaches could see that, okay, well, that's something that you want to be a part of, because that, you know, that environment allows, you know, is breeding success. So I hope that answers your question, Yus.
Very much so, yeah.
Yeah. So Hank, on the back of our conversation yesterday, we talked about coming up with some of the skills tests, or measuring, however you want to talk about it, and then potentially breaking into kind of maybe some categories of areas of the game, being short game. Short game could include, you know, say maybe inside 40, 50 yards, which is obviously putting and everything else, bunker play, chipping. And then, so called full swing will include pitching as well. Pitching being some of the yardages I talked about there, you know, 40, 50, 60 yards out to kind of, well, pitching out to 120 yards, whatever it may be, trying to do my conversions on yards. And then that can be related around some of the kind of the iron play, and then into maybe some tee shot challenges. A tee shot game for everyone's listening that I do quite a lot. I think I've shared this one with you, but depending on what I do actually now related a lot more is to the tournament that they're about to play. So I'd actually, so they've got an event next week where we look at the tee shots that they have. So whatever the course lays out. So it's not it's the tee shots being wood off the tee, not the par threes, so par fours, par fives. And I set up a fairway using TrackMan where I have 11.5 meters each side of the middle of the fairway, and it's 11.6 to 14.5 meters is first cut of rough, and then 14.5 outside that is a missed fairway. So we actually then, depending on the wind directions that we look at, we actually move around the range and play different tee shots using those parameters. And what we then do is, if you hit the fairway, you get 0.5 a stroke gained. If you hit in the first cut of rough, so, you know, that 11.6 to 14.5, that's 0 strokes gained. And then if you hit it outside that, it's -1 stroke gained. And they have 14 tee shots, but on the last 4 tee shots, there's a double penalty if you miss the fairway. So you hit in the first cut, it's okay, but if you hit in the rough, it's -2. But if you hit every fairway in the last four tee shots, you get an extra one stroke gained. So once again, it's a quick, easy way of kind of getting the player to get that kind of mindset. Okay, I'm about to play this course, or this course that's coming up in the next whatever time, next sort of 2 or 3 weeks, and you can actually start to then play the holes. And then if you're able to, obviously indoor, you know, it's pretty straightforward in regards to kind of what's in front of you. But if you're on the range, like I do, I'll actually move around the range to set up different angles relative to wind directions. I even go down the other side of the range to go back into a different type of wind. So I'm fortunate enough, it's pretty wide space, but really try to implement ways of kind of get them to be able to get more involved in the shots that they know is related back to kind of what they're trying to do in the event coming up.
I'm gonna confess I've used that quite a bit actually with the players, particularly outdoors, and I mean the players really love it. Well, that's what they told me anyway, but whether they actually do or not is another thing. But yeah, so there's my confession anyway to you, mate.
No, it's good. That's good. No, it's
and a check, Marty, to use CISO for using.
Hey.
The bill's in the post.
Yeah.
The problem
just confessed in front of 20 people, so.
But again, I mean, on a serious note, I mean, kind of feelings and emotions that a task like that evokes is very similar to actually playing the game, because particularly in the last 3 holes, I mean, you can kind of make or ruin your score depending on how you perform, and it's no different to what it's like in competitive golf. So
I get. Yeah, the other thing that I do that it might come across as a bit of how to say this nicely, like I'm a bit of an arsehole. When the players that I work with, when we test, they know that I'm not going to provide them any information. They hit a bad one. They want to turn to me and ask me why did I do that. They don't have that right to actually ask that question, because they don't get that on the golf course. So they're very, very clear from the first shot to the whatever shot they play. They've got to problem solve it. They've got to work it out. I'm gonna assess it. I'm gonna look at it. I'm recording it. I'm looking at left to right. I'm looking at misses either way, ball shape either way, whatever the struggles were. But I'm not at any stage giving any type of feedback until we kind of go through the debrief at the end. And I think as coaches, when we see someone struggle, I think it's very easy for us to go, just you need to do this, you need to do that. But the reality is tournament golf's not played that way. So these players need to understand that they need to work through whatever swing they've got at that point of time and deal with it and make sure they can get the result. And then once the result's done, all the scorecards in, they can then go through that assessment process or that debrief process where they can then ask questions. They go, every time I had that shot into that wind, I hit it that way. And then you can then, as the coach, you can go back to, okay, well, that's about it, the movement patterns that it's been displayed through 3D or whatever. That's why that shot is going to continue to kind of, your bad one on that shot is going to continue to look that way until you can get better at X. So I think that's just really using those kind of measuring or those testing things really allows us to expose. Not we're always looking to expose them and what they can't do, but also expose them what they're really, really good at as well, and reinforcing. You know what? You scored that way because that shot you did X or whatever it may be. So they start to kind of build up that memory bank of, okay, well, okay, I can get that, I understand that, or vice versa. It went that way. Well, that actually makes sense now because I do that on the range just because I do X. And I think that's the important part. We're looking at kind of what is the blueprint? The blueprint is how do we, empower these players to play on tour. It's them and the caddy effectively go through whatever they got to, whatever's in front of them and come up with the best decisions that they can come up with, and really educate the players. I think we talked about it previous webinars around the circus that the tour or the tours can be is, really educating the players that they really understand their game enough that when things come up, they know what their movement patterns are, and they're not going to be, they're not going to be listening to kind of the guy next to them saying, no, mate, you just need to try and do this or try and do that.
Yeah, let's go through the more detailed, probably we can get a couple of the example templates from you as well to send the guys and girls online. So when they build their own, maybe kind of use them as to help. And like you said, many probably already have good skills tests and are using them, and maybe everybody listening is that if you don't want to share something that you really feel that you worked hard on and you don't want the others to kind of benefit from your work, of course we understand, but it would be kind of a point to share stuff and go through stuff. So it's not a exam that we give numbers like this is really bad and this is good and now you can join us to the next webinar. But it's to kind of go through stuff and all the kind of pitfalls and positive findings that happen. So I think one important thing.
I'm gonna just try to jump in there. I got a view on that, and I was with you. I spend so much time, in my, it's all my own. A lot of this is my own IP, and you feel like, okay, it's all mine. I've got this, but I go back to kind of previous conversations around Ramsey, and Ramsey was the biggest influence on so many people that we've all talked about. And he was the complete opposite. He was about sharing everything he had, which is very confronting for a lot of people because they feel like, well, why did I just give all this away? But on the view that if we're trying to grow the game and try to get us better and players better, I think we need to share. I think we need to go the other way. I think actually we need to, whatever we got, because whatever I put out there, you guys are going to go, well, that's good, seen it before, whatever it is. But at least, geez, I'd really like that. I can take a bit of that. And if we all had that mentality that we're going to share this type of stuff and move this stuff, how can the game not get better in the future? How can we not have more people playing it? How can we, you go back to kind of our own jobs, the more people we play, obviously, I'm preaching to the disciple, but I think it's important that, I think that, I, like Evan, that the on-course game, that took about 12 months to develop. And I shared that with a stack of people around the world. I felt sorry for the athletes that that had to go through the 9 or 10 months of all the different type of versions of that game to get it to where we felt like it was comfortable. And I think that's one of those things. I think you need to these tests that we look at, call it version 1. The reality is it's not until version 7, 8, or 9 that, you're like, okay, yeah, I think this is really, really good. I think this is good. But I think, for the guys and girls, and I said, I completely understand if you don't, but I like the idea of, the more we can put things out there, it can only be better for what we're all trying to do anyway.
Yeah, I'm happy enough to send you the the Team Finland kind of test that we try and use as much as we can. So I'm happy to I can send you those and you can share those with the guys then.
Yeah, that's great. And I think it's if we kind of share different stuff, like you said, Marty, it's even though it's the same kind of same things going over and over, but different kind of tools, it makes it more interesting for the players as well. So maybe if we kind of share those things, and then we can collect more data that way as well. So it's if we kind of like, okay, I'll do this with my junior group as well. So let's see what level they are on, and then
benchmarking
other coaches. Then we might kind of get the whole picture of where we're going, or where's my juniors, where are they in these skills and stuff like that. So it might be kind of beneficial in that way as well for the creator.
Yeah, definitely.
A couple of questions from whether when you kind of are doing these tests, the benchmarking, whether you go to the PGA Tour stats, or do you use different stats for different level players, like the goals or?
Yeah, well, it's depending on, obviously you're right, depending on the level player. Like most of the pros I work with, we're looking at PGA Tour stats. But say shots to hole and a couple of stats programs out there, you can look at score range. So similar to what I showed you with that PER stuff earlier. So you can actually look at score range. So you can look at kind of, as opposed, don't worry about handicap, but say a 75 to 80 shooter. So if you had a kid that was, 80 to 85 shooter, what does that player need to do better to be 75 to 80? So what does that dispersion pattern need to be at that level? So yeah, using some of the information that you get from, say, shots to hole or Spider or different programs out there, you can then develop, different dispersion patterns, which is no different to, I know, what's his name that did it in the putting? Oh, the strokes gain guy. He came up with, Brody. He came up with, score ranges, or skill ranges, if you want to call it score ranges relative to, a 10-foot putt to a tour player versus a 30 handicap or what it may be. So you're right. I think coming up with, and I think it's really important as well, because a lot of time you know, we're working with kids and we're saying the level needs to be X, you know, and this expectation is that they need to hold a certain amount of putts from this distance. The reality is they just actually need to get a little bit better relative to where they are now, and knowing that, okay, your standard's here, and then there's your technical stuff you need to do over there, and then we're working towards this, but the end goal is we're trying to get to here. I think it's important for them to know what the kind of end goal looks like. So, but also know where they are and where they're trying to get to relative to kind of, you know, where they stand right now.
Yeah, it might be a little frustrating if you kind of you set up the goals too high, so you kind of feel that even though you're improving, you still feel that you're kind of failing all the time, so really far away from the goal. So
I did that. I had that in a program in Belgium where Dietrich and Thomas Peters was a part of that I worked with years ago, and the times I'd go over there and the, you know, middle of winter, or not middle of winter, and it's the greens are sanded and they're just horrible. Like, just the conditions are horrible. It's just winter over in Belgium, right? And not picking on the pro that was there, but the pro had this expectation that you should be holding, you know, the tour says that you should be holding X amount of putts. These kids are like 14, 15 years old. I'm sitting there going, well, you know, their skill level's not even close to it. And even we're talking about, like, it's nearly a fluke if the ball went the hole anyway, because the conditions that they're putting on are so bad. So it's all got to be relative to the environment and the skill level. But I think us as coaches, we need to go, okay, well, that's where you are. That's where we're trying to get to. We're going to improve this by, you know, it could be a dispersion pattern. We're trying to go, you know, you're at 12 feet from inside 40 meters. We're trying to get to 8 feet, you know, over a 10 shot period. I'm doing that with one of the squads that I'm working at the moment. We're trying to improve. We've got 24 shots within 40 meters. We're trying to improve 4 feet. You know, as a collective group, how can we just get 4 feet closer? So there's decision making, there's technique, there's training, there's practices, there's everything like that. So once again, just allows us to ask more questions about kind of what we're trying to achieve.
You also, if you included, like, if you're, I don't know, if you're working with a group of players, like with juniors, that you can't be watching each individual all the time while doing the test, do you kind of make them do a self-assessment afterwards or stuff like that, so you kind of get the feeling what they are thinking about themselves or performing?
Yep. And because if you go down to putting, okay, the self-assessment is, okay, you know, on the putts that you did miss, was it a right to left versus left to right? Was it short? Was it long? Was it line? Was it speed? You know, start to get them to understand that, you know, there's ways, there's reasons why we missed certain putts. And then, you know, and then start to look at those patterns. Is it left to right? Is it speed left to right? Is it right to, you know, whatever it may be, but get them a little, as opposed to being reactive to, okay, well, I just missed it because I felt like I pushed it or pulled it. I don't know. And I think I'd be interested in the coach's thoughts on this as well, but I think we're quite quick to say we push or pull it, but I think a lot of time it's speed and read that kind of makes us look like it's a push or a pull. Because I think we get that wrong first, but we quickly to kind of, this is in putting, but analyze, I must have did whatever, pull or push.
Yeah, so it's kind of building awareness of what they are doing themselves, but also awareness kind of like to the coach as well. So, okay, maybe your awareness isn't that clear, like, okay, you think you're pulling or pushing, but it was actually just a combination of different other things, speed, line, or aim, or whatever, the break, right to left, left to right. So kind of getting a deeper understanding of what's happening. So,
well, I do that as well, where once again, I'm not giving them information, but I would go through a putt and I would read it myself. So if I'm doing a 5 feet test, and I'd read the putt, they read the putt, they execute the putt. Not saying I'm the best green reader, but at least I have, you know, then if, you know, I'm looking at their start line, how well they execute the putt, and then I can make my own judgment call at the time that, I might have thought that there was more break in it or less break in it. That they've gone, no, well, I pushed it, and I'm like, well, no, you underread it, or vice versa. So, getting more involved in kind of the process of trying to execute a shot as well. Once again, I wouldn't give that information until kind of the task is finished. But I'm recording that. I'm kind of writing that part down, and this is my thoughts. And then maybe go back to that same spot before again, and then go through that kind of that process of kind of how'd you get to the point of saying, you thought it was half a cup outside left, or whatever it may be.
Yeah. So anything else comes to mind? Well, if we send, like I said, if we send everybody kind of the info about where to pay attention when building some maybe new ones, or if they're already using some, how to report. So if we do it by email, but anything else that comes into mind, or from the guys and girls listening, any questions concerning that? So we'll be having the next one on the 5th of March, next webinar, and so trying to get those tests in use before that, and maybe do a little report. And if the schedule is too tight for some of you, then we can do it later on. So, but the next webinar we are planning to go through the tests a little bit more detailed. Or
questions, gotta be questions. I think that the stuff around testing, and I might have said this in the previous webinar, there's a lot of, when people go their skills test, there's a lot of stuff out there. Well, I don't know who made this up, north, south, east, west, or, the T drills and everything else. I'd love to meet that person, but there's a lot of people out there doing stuff where I think there's more of a mental challenge. Can you complete the task, which I think has its place, but it's not measuring the skill. It's measuring the mental, which arguably is just as important. But are we learning from the skill of executing the shot, versus are they learning from mistakes, which they don't have that opportunity on the golf course because they don't get the chance of hitting the same 5-footer over and over again until they hole it. So when you think about the kind of the test that we're trying to talk about, how well or how much can we make it as close as we can to the game? So, randomize, to the point of putting different spots, different lines, different reads on every single one. Pitching, it could be off different lies, different slopes, rough versus fairway. This is how much can we really start to think about, and this is where it can look a little bit funny to watch, because all of a sudden you're on the range and you're moving around, or even better, like a lot of these tests that I've got, we actually do it on the golf course. So you do it to a left pin from a certain yardage, and you record it. That's the absolute best way of recording is, or a putt or a short game challenge or whatever it may be. They play the hole, then you go over here and you got to hit this shot from this lie to that pin, and you record the dispersion pattern and look at the process of how they do it. So I think if you think about the test that you're trying to develop, can you take that test on the golf course, and in a 9-hole practice round, can you hit one shot from different ranges on each hole that allows you to, to measure that over a 9-hole period?
Yeah. Any comments, Jussi?
No, I'm looking forward to kind of seeing and hopefully sharing some information. Personally, I can say how much I've kind of gained from kind of Marty, like the stuff you and I have discussed personally, and it's helped me tremendously. And I guess and everybody online has done some shape of testing, with players and developed and had to think about it and stuff like that. And I think, the challenge is always trying to make it better and better, So, that's a cool part about kind of, and I know from, personally, I've shown you a lot of the things that I thought were good, and you looked at them and kind of said, no, mate, that's crap, go and think about it again. So that's the process, and it's great,
I didn't say it was crap.
Yeah, you did. Yeah, you did.
Or I thought it was crap. I didn't say it was crap. No, I'm just joking.
Yeah.
No, but it's interesting. I remember years ago when Luke Donald got to #1 in the world, and his coach that use. His college guy, Pat Goss, and they worked. He talked about stuff, and I remember they had a whole heap of different games, which I thought were quite cool. His putting game was to, it's a bit like before Put's game was to make sure that he was, I think it was from 5 to 12 feet, that he was in training, that he was, just miles ahead of the field. But then his wedge play, wherever they talked about training dirty, which goes back to the psych that he was using at the time.
Dave Alred.
Training dirty, which was they would work on, dropping balls at different yardages where they knew that yardage or that lie or that, that shot relative to that pin or the wind direction was an uncomfortable situation. So in his practice rounds, he would actually practice being really uncomfortable because he knew that at some point in the tournament, that stuff's going to come up. It can't be avoided. So in training and in practice, or in practice rounds or in training, they try to get, which is a lot of Dave stuff as well, is try to, train to be uncomfortable. And I think that's a great way to be, because that's the reality is golf is that, you stand on a tee and you've got to deal with what you got on the kind of day that you've got it. So allowing them to understand that, practice should look that way and feel that way. And you should walk away. I think you should walk away from a practice session and it kind of hurts the brain a little bit. You know what I mean? Like that was hard. I think a lot of times people are very comfortable, especially club level golfers. They're very comfortable just saying, well, I hit a bucket of balls. They choose their favorite club. And yep, I've done some practice. But the reality is they step up the next day and golf just doesn't play that way. So I don't know. I think the more we can kind of make it more game-like, obviously there's skill level and different age and different times of development that we need to be looking at things slightly different. But I think as coaches, we can look at that. We all know that. We all know that, a 12-year-old can't hit the same amount of balls as what a, 20-year-old can do and at the same level. So I think we're all sort of past understanding that, okay, we get that, but how do we expose them? I do that. Many of it's more for the better players, say, that come see me for the first time. I will set up a skills test, as opposed to get on the range and say, hey, let's just hit a few shots of that pole. I actually set up a test and go, look, I just want to take you through this test. And so all of a sudden now they're completely engaged into trying to hit a shot. And then that's where I'd film them. I film them while they're trying to hit tests, or when they're trying to hit shots. And I go, that. So then when I go show them later, the six shot this is the one I videoed, and this is where it went. What were you thinking there? Like, how's that swing look to you? Or what are you trying to achieve? So you actually try to, it's like the best, the best footage we can get is when they're competing. So once again, how can we have in our own training environment or our own teaching environment, how can we get them a little rattled and a little different? Because you think about, I've been doing a lot more coaching for around the club level stuff, because I'm not able to not able to travel at the moment. But if you I think a lot of a person's had a lesson off you, they come back the next week and they come to see you next week, and when they're standing in front of you, they're thinking about the last lesson, and they're going, oh, okay, Marty said I had to do X. So there's so much thinking about X actually not, that doesn't represent what they actually do when they're playing. So, you know, allowing them to go, okay, you know what, here's a little task. I want you to try and hit it between these two poles or these flags or whatever it is, and try to get them more involved or more externally involved in the shot they're trying to hit, and then record that and then review that and assess it. And that kind of cycle that we talk about goes around again.
Yes, so being more task oriented, as we talked a couple of webinars ago, so kind of clear tasks and how can they perform that might be the kind of the key when building tests and kind of measuring practices.
Yeah.
All right, so anything else that comes into mind? We send kind of the info and instructions for the building
next one
through email, and you can see
we can send out kind of a clearer brief in the next couple of days.
Sounds good.
All right.
Thanks again, mate.
All right, guys. Well, everyone be safe in the crazy times we have, and I look forward to kind of seeing what comes back.
Great. Thank you very much, Marty, and thank you everyone listening.
Thanks, mate.
Great stuff.
Cheers, buddy.
All right, guys.
Thanks a lot.
Have a good day. Sorry.
Oh, sorry, Marty. One question.
Yes.
No, it's only thanks, Marty.
Oh, sorry. Sorry, there was a question. Sorry. Easy.
Well, that was important. So.
Very good.
All right. Thank you. Bye.
All right. Thanks, guys.